There are moments in baseball that stop everyone cold. Not because of a walk-off home run. Not because of a perfect game. Not because of a trade that reshapes a franchise overnight. But because something happens on the field, or in a dugout, or in a post-game interview, that strips away every layer of professionalism and exposes something completely raw. Something human. Something that reminds every person watching that these are not just athletes executing a craft. These are competitors burning with a fire so intense that containing it becomes physically impossible. That is exactly what happened with Team Japan. And the American media did not know how to handle it. What started as a series of emotional outbursts from three of Japan's most recognizable MLB stars, Shohei Ohtani, Seiya Suzuki, and Masataka Yoshida, has triggered a reaction across American sports media that nobody fully anticipated. Because the response was not criticism. It was not confusion. It was not the typical analytical deconstruction that American sports journalism defaults to when something unexpected happens on a baseball field. The response was admiration, borderline reverence. And one question repeated across broadcasts, podcasts, newspaper columns, and social media threads with a consistency that felt almost coordinated. How can you hate Team Japan? That question deserves a real answer. And to find it, you have to go back to where this all started. Japanese baseball has always carried a specific cultural identity in the eyes of American sports media. Disciplined, precise, controlled. The stereotype, built over decades of observation, painted Japanese players as stoic professionals who processed every situation with the same measured composure. They did not show up opponents. They did not explode with visible emotion. They executed, they bowed, they moved on. Team Japan, and specifically these three players, just dismantled that stereotype completely. When the outbursts came, they came with a force that caught everyone off guard. Because it was not one player losing composure in a single moment. It was three of the most high-profile Japanese players in MLB, each in their own way, letting the world see exactly what competing at this level actually costs them emotionally. The restraint that had defined the public image of Japanese baseball gave way to something unfiltered. Fists clenched, voices raised, celebrations that crossed every line of the traditionally reserved demeanor the American baseball world had come to associate with players from Japan. Ohtani, a player so carefully managed in his public presentation that his interpreter became a global figure simply by proximity, showed a version of himself that even his closest followers in Los Angeles had never fully witnessed. The intensity was not just visible. It was overwhelming. A player of his magnitude, with everything he has already achieved, competing like the outcome of every single pitch was the most important moment of his life. Suzuki, whose journey from Nippon professional baseball to the Chicago Cubs introduced him to a fan base that had grown deeply attached to his quiet consistency, suddenly revealed a competitive ferocity that made Cubs fans feel like they had been watching a dimmed version of him all along. And Yoshida, whose offensive excellence with the Boston Red Sox had established him as one of the most disciplined hitters in the American League, showed that beneath the plate discipline and the measured approach at the plate lived something combustible. Something that international competition unlocked in a way that a regular 162-game MLB season simply could not. The American sports media landscape is not always kind to displays of emotion from international players. There is a long and complicated history of how emotion gets interpreted differently depending on who is expressing it, in what context, and wearing which uniform. What reads as passion for one player can be framed as arrogance for another. But with Team Japan, something different happened. ESPN analysts who typically reserve their highest praise for domestic stars found themselves struggling to articulate what they were watching without simply surrendering to awe. Broadcasters who have called thousands of baseball games described the atmosphere surrounding Team Japan's games as unlike anything they had encountered in their professional careers. Columnists who built careers on skepticism and measured takes published pieces that read less like analysis and more like love letters to a style of baseball they had not realized they were missing. One prominent American sports commentator captured the mood that seemed to define the entire media reaction when he said on air, "I came into this ready to analyze. I ended up just watching. There is something happening with this team that statistics do not explain." That sentiment echoed across the coverage. Because what Team Japan presented was not just a tactically superior brand of baseball. It was an emotionally complete one. A team that played with the precision the world expected from Japanese baseball and the fire the world had never fully associated with it. The combination was disorienting in the best possible way. Social media amplified everything. Clips of Ohtani's reactions spread across platforms within minutes of occurring. Suzuki's moments drew reactions from Cubs fans halfway around the world, who felt like they were finally seeing their player completely unleashed. Yoshida's intensity reframed how Red Sox fans understood the player they had been watching in Boston. The comments sections, typically a reliable source of cynicism and division, filled instead with a single recurring sentiment. How can you hate Team Japan? To understand the depth of the American media reaction, you have to understand what Shohei Ohtani represents in the current landscape of American sports. He is already the most valuable player in MLB history by contract. He has already produced seasons that required the creation of entirely new statistical categories to accommodate what he was doing. He has already won MVP awards, set records, and performed at a level that made even the most hardened baseball analysts run out of appropriate comparisons. But Ohtani has always been somewhat mythological in his public presentation. Carefully managed, thoughtfully mediated. The version of Ohtani that most American fans interact with on a daily basis is a polished one. Warm but controlled. Accessible but never fully exposed. Team Japan changed that. What the American media witnessed was Ohtani competing without the filter. Without the careful management of the regular season environment. Without the 162-game patience that MLB baseball demands and that inevitably smooths out the emotional edges of even the most intensely competitive players. International competition compressed everything. Every game felt like a playoff game. Every at-bat carried the weight of national pride in a way that a Tuesday night regular season game in April simply cannot replicate. And in that compressed, high-pressure environment, the version of Ohtani that Shinya Miyamoto had described years ago, the one who operates by an internal standard that never stops rising, became fully visible to an American audience for perhaps the first time. The reaction was immediate and visceral, because American sports fans understand fire. They understand wanting something so badly that your body cannot contain it. They understand the particular beauty of watching someone who has already achieved everything still competing like they have nothing. It is the rarest quality in elite sport. And Ohtani delivered it without reservation. Fox Sports analyst Ben Verlander, reflecting on the coverage, noted that the clips of Ohtani during Team Japan's run generated more organic engagement than almost any regular season content the network had produced in recent memory. People were not just watching, Verlander observed. They were feeling it. While Ohtani inevitably attracted the largest share of American media attention, the reactions of Suzuki and Yoshida added crucial texture to the story that was developing around Team Japan. Seiya Suzuki has spent his time with the Cubs building a reputation as one of the most fundamentally sound outfielders in the National League. His approach at the plate is studied. His routes in the outfield are calculated. Cubs fans have learned to appreciate him through the language of consistency and reliability, qualities that earn deep respect but rarely generate the kind of visceral excitement that fills highlight packages. What they saw with Team Japan was a player for whom baseball is not just a profession but a deeply personal expression of identity. The Cubs' outfield had always been where Suzuki worked. The Team Japan dugout was where he lived. American media covering Suzuki's moments noted a quality they struggled to name precisely. The closest approximation that kept appearing across different outlets was authenticity. A sense that what they were watching was not performed or calculated but simply real. A player being entirely himself in a context that allowed it fully. For Yoshida, the narrative carried additional weight because of the expectations that had surrounded his transition to MLB. Joining the Red Sox on a significant contract after establishing himself as one of NPB's premier hitters, Yoshida faced the standard adjustment period that accompanies every international player's arrival in the American game. His numbers were strong. His approach was respected. But the full picture of who Yoshida was as a competitor had remained somewhat obscured by the context of a rebuilding Red Sox team navigating its own identity questions. Team Japan removed that obscurity entirely. Yoshida competing for his country, in a tournament where the stakes were existential rather than positional, revealed a player whose competitive instincts operate at a frequency that the regular MLB environment had not yet fully activated. Boston's media contingent, which had covered Yoshida with professional appreciation rather than genuine excitement, suddenly found itself writing about him in an entirely different register. An internal source familiar with the Red Sox organization noted that the coaching staff watched Team Japan's tournament with particular attention to Yoshida, not out of concern but out of revelation. "We knew he was good," the source shared. "We did not fully understand yet what drives him. Now we do." The American media reaction to Ohtani, Suzuki, and Yoshida's outbursts is not happening in isolation. It is occurring at a moment when MLB is more invested than at any previous point in its history in establishing a genuine global identity. The international growth strategy the league has pursued, the games played in Japan, the London series, the growing investment in Latin American development pipelines, all of it reflects an understanding at the league's highest levels that baseball's future is not exclusively American. The sport is genuinely global in its talent base, and the question of whether it can become genuinely global in its fan base is one that the next decade will answer. Team Japan's emotional outbursts, and the American media reaction they generated, represent something significant within that larger context. Because what happened was not a story about international players adapting to American baseball culture. It was a story about American baseball culture being moved by something it received from outside itself. The admiration was not condescending. It was not the kind of appreciation that contains within it a quiet assumption of American superiority. It was genuine recognition that something beautiful had been witnessed, that a style of competing, an intensity of caring, a willingness to be completely exposed by the depth of your investment in something, had been displayed at a level that transcended any national framework. Dave Roberts, whose Dodgers roster includes Ohtani and whose fingerprints are on how Japanese baseball talent gets integrated into the highest-level MLB environment, reflected on this dynamic recently. "The emotion you see from these players in international competition tells you everything about who they are," Roberts said. "That does not disappear when they come back to the regular season. It just finds different expressions. But it is always there. So how can you hate Team Japan? The honest answer is that you cannot. Not if you understand what you are actually watching. Not if you allow yourself to receive what these players are offering without filtering it through preconceptions about what international baseball is supposed to look like or how Japanese players are supposed to carry themselves. What Ohtani, Suzuki, and Yoshida showed the American media was not a departure from who they are. It was a full arrival. A complete presentation of players who have been giving MLB everything they have while still, in some essential way, holding the most combustible part of themselves in reserve for the moments that demand it most completely. International competition demanded it, and they delivered without hesitation. American media saw it, felt it, and responded the only way that was honest, with awe, with admiration, and with a question that, once asked, answers itself immediately. How can you hate Team Japan? You cannot. And after what the world witnessed, it is hard to imagine ever trying.